Adaeze secretly donated her kidney to save the man she loved. She was completely unaware she was saving a corporate heir. At just 21 years old, Adaeze faced unimaginable adversity. She had lost both parents in a devastating road accident. This tragic event thrust her into a life of extreme suffering. She was a girl who learned to take up very little space. She moved quietly through the world like a shadow. She wandered the vibrant, chaotic streets of Lagos. But beneath her calm exterior, a powerful storm of resilience was brewing. The story of Adaeze did not begin in sprawling mansions. It didn't start in the high-rise penthouses of Victoria Island. It began in the dusty, cramped corners of a small room. It was a one-room apartment in a very noisy neighborhood. The sharp scent of frying onions filled the humid evening air. The loud sound of clanging pots echoed down the narrow halls. Adaeze worked hard as a humble cleaning girl. She scrubbed dirty floors and washed heavy clothes from dawn to dusk. She worked until her hands were rough and calloused. Her back ached with a dull, persistent throb. Yet, she never once complained. She carried the warm memory of her parents like a sacred lamp. It was a bright light that guided her through the darkest nights. It was during one of those long, exhausting days. She was at a local construction site, carrying heavy bags of cement. That was where she first met Dotun. At the time, Dotun was nothing more than a struggling junior supervisor. He was a man with big dreams but very empty pockets. He was handsome, with a warm, inviting smile. That smile seemed to promise a future much better than the present. Adaeze, in her sweet innocence, fell deeply in love. She saw a bright spark in him that she desperately wanted to nurture. She began to spend her meager earnings to cook for him. She brought him warm bowls of jollof rice and fried plantain. She carried them to the dusty site every single afternoon. She wanted to ensure he never went to bed hungry. For 3 long years, Adaeze was the wind beneath Dotun's wings. She was the one who stayed awake with him late at night. She sat by the flickering kerosene lamp as he studied for exams. She was the one who carefully patched his only worn-out suit. She made sure he looked highly presentable for his job interviews. She was completely invisible to the rest of the world. But in Dotun's eyes, she truly believed she had found a safe home. Little did she know, a dark cloud was gathering. This was only the beginning of a very painful journey. It was a cruel journey that would break her heart into 1,000 pieces. The first scary signs of the coming storm appeared on a Tuesday. Dotun had complained of a lingering, heavy fatigue. He felt a strange heaviness in his limbs that he just couldn't explain. At first, they thought it was just the stress of the hot Lagos heat. They blamed the heavy pressure of his new job promotion. But as the long weeks went by, his physical condition rapidly deteriorated. His skin quickly took on a sickly, pale yellow hue. His breath became very shallow, heavy, and extremely labored. Adaeze watched with growing, silent terror. The man she loved so dearly was withering away right before her eyes. When the medical diagnosis finally came, it hit Adaeze incredibly hard. It felt exactly like a brutal slap across the face. Chronic kidney failure. The doctor's office felt freezing cold and unwelcoming. The air was very thick with the sharp scent of antiseptic. It carried the heavy, crushing weight of bad news. Dotun urgently needed a kidney transplant to survive. The cost of the procedure was absolutely astronomical. They needed $300,000 for the medical bills. They also had to search desperately for a living donor. But even more daunting was finding a truly compatible match. Dotun was completely devastated by the terrible news. He lay helpless in the sterile, white hospital bed. His once strong frame was now skeletal and terribly weak. It was then that Adaeze did something truly unbelievable. Most people would easily consider it absolute madness. Without telling a single soul, not even Dotun, she made a brave choice. She quietly approached the doctors and asked to be tested. She spent agonizing days waiting in the cold hospital corridors. The white floor tiles brightly reflected the flickering fluorescent lights above. She sat there alone, praying to a God she desperately hoped was listening. When the test results finally came back, the doctor was absolutely stunned. He looked at Adaeze with a strange mixture of awe and deep concern. She was a perfect match. It was a rare, one-in-a-million miracle. But Adaeze knew something very important about her man. If she told Dotun the complete truth, he might refuse. He might say no out of sheer guilt or foolish male pride. She also knew all about his demanding mother, Madame Patience. Madame Patience had recently arrived from the rural village of Ogwashi. She would never allow her precious son to be beholden to an orphan. Madame Patience was a woman with a very hard, cold heart. It was as hard as the baked red earth of her village. She was a greedy woman who measured people by their pedigree. She only cared about the exact size of their bank accounts. So, Adaeze made a brave, secret pact with the lead surgeon. She strongly insisted that the organ donation remain strictly anonymous. She told the doctors to firmly say the kidney came from a deceased donor. To fund the expensive post-operative medical care, Adaeze made another huge sacrifice. She sold the only valuable thing she had left from her dear parents. It was a small plot of ancestral land in the village. She had always hoped to one day build a modest house there, but she willingly gave it all away. She gave her healthy body, her bright future, and her very life force. The delicate surgery was a massive, incredible success. Dotun's body quickly began to regain its lost, youthful strength. He was completely fueled by the healthy organ Adaeze had sacrificed. Meanwhile, she was resting in a separate, quiet wing of the large hospital. Her own physical recovery was terribly slow and deeply painful. There were long nights when the pain in her side was excruciating. It was so sharp she had to bite her lip very hard. She did it to keep from screaming out loud in agony. She feared alerting Dotun, who was resting comfortably in the next ward. She watched quietly from a distance as Dotun started to walk again. His healthy, warm color was returning day by day. His eyes were very bright, with a brand new lease on life. 6 happy months passed, and the season slowly changed. The heavy rains gave way to the dusty, dry Harmattan winds. Dotun was not just recovered, he was truly thriving. Then, in a wild twist of fate, everything shifted entirely. He had been surprisingly contacted by a high-ranking corporate lawyer. The lawyer revealed a shocking, incredible truth. Dotun was the long-lost heir to the massive Zenith Global Industries empire. His late father, a wealthy man he had never known, had died. He had left Dotun a vast fortune that completely defied human imagination. Overnight, Dotun's reality changed forever. He went from a struggling site supervisor to a very powerful man. He became one of the most powerful billionaires in the entire country. The transformation in his life was absolute and very sudden. They moved far away from the cramped one-room apartment. They relocated to a sprawling, luxurious mansion in Banana Island. It was a massive place of towering glass walls and shining marble floors, but to Adaeze it felt as cold and empty as a tomb. Dotun happily traded his worn-out, dusty shoes for expensive Italian leather. He traded his old, simple dreams for aggressive corporate takeovers. And as his social status quickly rose to the top, something sad happened. His memory of Adaze's deep loyalty began to fade away. It vanished just like a fragile dream at daybreak. Madame Patience was now proudly adorned in expensive, imported lace. She wore heavy gold jewelry that clanked loudly as she moved. She quickly became the wicked architect of Adaze's daily misery. She saw Adaeze as a dirty stain on her son's new, polished life. "Dotun, my son," she would say, her harsh voice dripping with toxic venom. "You are a great king now. A mighty lion does not walk with a lowly goat. Look at this pathetic girl. She is a dirty orphan with no name, no real family, and no beauty. She will only embarrass you in front of your billionaire friends." Dotun should have defended the woman who bravely saved him. He should have protected the girl who literally gave him her own flesh. Instead, he began to actively listen to his mother's poisonous words. Success truly reveals character. It doesn't change it. The kind man Adaeze thought she knew was slowly disappearing forever. He was entirely replaced by a cold, arrogant stranger. He looked at her with sharp irritation instead of warm love. He started staying out very late every single night. He attended glamorous galas and endless corporate board meetings. He kept leaving Adaeze all alone in the vast, silent, and lonely mansion. The ultimate, heartbreaking betrayal happened on a humid Friday evening. Adaeze had spent hours preparing a simple, traditional meal. She made delicious pounded yam and rich egusi soup. It was exactly the way she used to cook in their small room. She was desperately hoping to reconnect with the man she still loved. She was still feeling physically weak from the hospital. Her body had never quite returned to its full strength after the surgery. Her side often ached with a dull pain when she stood for too long. Dotun walked in, flanked by large security guards in dark suits. He didn't even bother to look at the warm food on the table. He looked at Adaeze as if she were a broken piece of furniture. She was an item that simply no longer fit the modern decor. Madame Patience stood proudly right behind him. A cruel, triumphant smirk played visibly on her face. "Adaeze," Dotun began, his deep voice cold and entirely devoid of emotion. "We really need to talk. My life has completely changed for the better. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Zenith Global now. I have heavy responsibilities that you simply cannot understand. You don't belong here in this elite world. You never did." The harsh words dropped like a heavy stone into a deep, dark well. Adaeze's heart began beating faster and faster. A thick lump formed in her throat, making it very hard to breathe. "Dotun, what are you saying to me? We have been together for 3 long, beautiful years. I stayed faithfully with you when you were dying. I gave you absolutely everything I had. You did what any poor girl in your position would do," Madame Patience interrupted loudly. She stepped forward with a very vicious glare. "You just wanted a chance at a much better life. But that chance is completely over now. My son is marrying the beautiful daughter of the Minister of Petroleum. She is a classy girl with high status. She is a girl with a very bright future, not a sickly, weak orphan who looks like she's about to fall apart." Dotun looked away, firmly refusing to meet Adaeze's tearful eyes. "I've arranged for a small, cheap apartment for you in the outskirts. I will also give a sum of money to settle you, but you must pack up your things and leave tonight. My new fiancé is arriving tomorrow morning. I don't want any silly, embarrassing drama." Adaeze felt the large, luxurious room spinning around her. The expensive luxury vehicles parked in the driveway outside. The tailored silk suits hanging neatly in the large closet. The very life flowing smoothly through Dotun's healthy veins. All of it was there simply because of her selfless sacrifice. And yet, she was being violently thrown out like useless trash. "Dotun, please listen to me. I am not well. I still have sharp, terrible pains. I have nowhere else to go." "That is no longer my concern," Dotun said. His voice was as sharp and cold as a razor blade. "Go and pack your things immediately. You have exactly 1 hour." As the long weeks went by, Adaeze had settled into a rhythm of silent grieving. But this specific moment was a sharp pain unlike any other. She slowly packed her few personal belongings. She stuffed them into a single, battered old suitcase. She took absolutely nothing that Dotun had bought her after he became rich. She proudly walked out of the massive mansion. Her feet were completely bare on the cold, polished marble floor. Her side throbbed heavily with a very familiar, burning ache. The heavy iron gates of the mansion swung shut right behind her. They closed tightly with a definitive, loud metallic clang. Adaeze stood completely alone on the dark, empty street. The distant thunder rolled loudly across the dark Lagos lagoon. It signaled the terrifying start of a very heavy, cold rain. She had absolutely no money in her pockets. The settlement money Dotun had promised was never delivered to her. She had no land to return to. She had sold it all just to save his life. She had only one kidney left, and she carried a heart that was actively bleeding with sorrow. Little did Dotun know the gravity of his cruel actions. This small act of pure cruelty would set a massive chain of events in motion. It was a chain of karma he could never hope to control. Neither of them knew that this was only the beginning of the storm. As the first cold drops of rain began to fall from the sky, she shivered. The rain quickly soaked her thin, worn-out dress. It mixed freely with the warm tears that rolled down her cheeks. She turned her back on the bright lights of the mansion. She walked bravely into the total darkness. She was a girl truly invisible to the wealthy world, but she was a girl whose pure integrity was a shining crown. It was a crown that no billionaire could ever afford to buy. What nobody could see was her incredible quiet strength. It was the deep strength that held her together as she collapsed. She fell weakly under a small, rusty bus stop shelter. Her trembling hand was tightly clutching the sensitive scar on her side. She was totally alone in the world. She was completely destitute, but she was still morally intact. She had selflessly saved a human life. She did it even if that life had chosen to destroy hers. And in the deep silence of the rainy night, Adaeze whispered a quiet prayer. It was not a bitter prayer for revenge. It was a simple prayer for the strength to survive just one more day. For she knew, deep down in her weary soul, that the storm was coming. And when it finally arrived, it would not be a simple rain. It would not be the rain that washed away the ugly sins of the powerful. It would be the quiet, relentless power of a hidden truth. It was a powerful truth that simply could not be buried forever. Adaeze slowly closed her heavy, tired eyes. The fresh scent of the wet earth filled her tired senses. She mentally prepared for the bitter struggle that lay ahead. Little did she know, her painful path was about to change. She was about to cross paths with someone very special, someone who would see her, truly see her, for the very first time in her life. The next morning, Adaeze woke long before the bright sun came up. The heavy rain from the night before had left the air thick and chilly. The hard concrete bench of the bus stop felt terrible. It felt exactly like a solid block of ice against her fragile bones. She slowly opened her swollen, red eyes. She squinted painfully against the hazy, pale gray light. Dawn was just beginning to break over the sprawling city of Lagos. Every single muscle in her delicate body screamed in loud protest as she tried to sit up. The scar on her side was a harsh physical reminder. It was the reminder of the life she had saved and the love she had lost. It throbbed with a relentless, sharp, and burning ache. She had absolutely no money, no food, and no safe shelter. The bustling city all around her was quickly waking up. It was completely indifferent to the broken girl shivering under the damp metal roof. Adaeze knew she absolutely could not stay there. She gathered her old, battered suitcase. Its handles were badly frayed, and its corners were dented from years of hardship. She picked it up and began to walk down the noisy road. She did not know exactly where she was going. She only knew that she had to keep moving to survive the day. By midday, the intense heat was completely unbearable. The harsh African sun beat down upon the black asphalt mercilessly. It created shimmering, hazy waves of heat that distorted the distant horizon. The noise of the busy city was totally deafening. Yellow commercial buses roared past her on the crowded street. Their loud conductors were hanging dangerously out of the open doors. They were shouting out destinations into the hot, dusty wind. The thick exhaust fumes mixed with the smell of damp earth and open gutters. It created an overwhelming sensory assault that made Adaeze feel very dizzy. Her empty stomach growled loudly. It was an empty, hollow sound that perfectly echoed the profound emptiness in her broken heart. She wandered aimlessly for long hours under the punishing sun. Finally, she found herself at the edge of the famous Oshodi market. It was a sprawling, chaotic labyrinth of wooden stalls and colorful umbrellas. Thousands of busy people were pushing aggressively through the narrow, dusty pathways. The market was exactly like a living, breathing entity. It was pulsating loudly with the frantic, chaotic energy of daily survival. Here, amidst the deafening cacophony of traders loudly haggling, she sought a lifeline. Wheelbarrows were clattering noisily over the uneven, rocky ground. The sharp, strong scent of raw meat and dried fish filled the air. Adaeze approached several busy stall owners. Her voice was a mere, weak whisper as she begged for any kind of work. Most of them waved her away without a second glance. They saw only another desperate face in a massive sea of urban poverty. Finally, the late afternoon shadows began to stretch across the dirt roads. An elderly woman who sold roasted plantains and corn noticed her. The older woman took deep pity on the frail, tired girl. Her face was deeply lined with decades of hard, back-breaking labor. She offered Adaeze a very meager daily wage. Her new job was to tend to the hot roasting fire. It was grueling, brutal, and totally exhausting work. Adaeze was tasked with constantly fanning the red-hot charcoals. She had to keep turning the heavy plantains so they wouldn't burn. She had to ensure the cooking fire never died out. The thick smoke was suffocating, constantly stinging her tired eyes. Hot tears rolled down her ash-stained cheeks. They mingled freely with the heavy sweat that poured down from her hot forehead. The intense heat of the fire radiated fiercely against her delicate skin. It severely aggravated the deep tissue pain of her old surgical wound. Every time she bent down to stoke the glowing embers, a sharp jolt of agony shot up her spine. It forced her to bite her lower lip until it bled. She did this just to keep from crying out loud in pain. Days slowly turned into long, exhausting weeks, and weeks painfully dragged into heavy months. As the weeks went by, Adaeze settled into a harsh rhythm. It was a daily rhythm of agonizing manual labor. Her hands had once been very soft and gentle. Now, they became heavily calloused and badly blistered. It was from the constant heat and the rough handling of burning charcoal. Her clothes were permanently stained with dark black ash. She always smelled strongly of wood smoke and sweat. She lived in a small, pathetic makeshift tent. It was made of torn tarpaulin and discarded wooden pallets. She slept fearfully behind the busy market stalls. It was a dirty place where the mosquitoes swarmed thick in the humid night air. Yet, despite the unimaginable daily suffering, she never once complained. She learned to take up as little space as humanly possible. She moved very quietly through her painful days. She was like an invisible ghost tending to the hot flames of survival. During the long, quiet hours of tending the fire, Adaeze's mind would wander. It would often drift into a deep, reflective silence. She thought a lot about Dotun. She thought about the sprawling, beautiful mansion in Banana Island. She remembered the crisp air conditioning and the soft, plush carpets. She recalled the endless array of shiny luxury vehicles. She vividly remembered the frightening day she had lain on the cold operating table. She remembered the terrifying hiss of the hospital anesthesia machine. And she remembered the final, loving prayer she had whispered for the man she loved. She prayed right before the heavy darkness took her under. Did she regret it now? The bitter question haunted her during the lonely, terrifying nights. But every time the dark bitterness threatened to completely consume her, she remembered her late mother's sweet voice. Her mother had always told her a very important lesson. True wealth is measured not in gold, but in the kindness we show to strangers. Success reveals true character, it doesn't change it. Dotun's sudden wealth had simply revealed the coldness that had always been inside him. Adaeze slowly realized that she had not lost a bright future. Instead, she had been saved from a sad life with a man who had no soul. This realization did not magically stop the physical pain, but it gave her a quiet, unbreakable, and noble dignity. What nobody could see was the quiet strength that held her broken pieces together. One particular afternoon, something very unusual happened. The busy market was exceptionally crowded. The noise levels were reaching a crazy, deafening fever pitch. The heat was stifling and heavily oppressive. The air was thick with flying dust and the sweet smell of roasting yams. Through the chaotic, moving sea of sweaty bodies, Adaeze noticed a strange figure. He was struggling hard to navigate the crowded, narrow pathway. It was an elderly man, a lowly street sweeper. He was clad in dirty rags so filthy they were stiff with old grime. He dragged his crippled right leg awkwardly behind him. His thin body bent sideways as he walked. It was as if he were carrying the heavy weight of the entire world on his fragile shoulders. His face was completely obscured by a wild, matted beard. He had a thick layer of dirt covering his skin, and he carried a worn-out, broken broom made of dried palm fronds. The busy crowd was absolutely merciless to the poor man. Angry market women yelled at him to get far away from their food stalls. They violently swatted at him as if he were a sick, stray dog. Impatient young men pushed him roughly out of their busy path. They laughed loudly as he stumbled and nearly lost his delicate balance. He was treated with absolute, unapologetic disgust. He was an outcast, even among the very poor people of the market. Adaeze quietly watched him. Her kind heart began to beat much faster. She recognized the profound, heavy isolation in his tired posture. She knew exactly what it felt like to be totally invisible. She knew what it was to be treated as less than human. The crippled sweeper finally managed to reach the edge of Adaeze's roasting stall. He was gasping desperately for a breath of fresh air. The relentless, burning sun had taken a severe toll on his weak body. His dirty hands trembled violently. He tried to lean against a wooden post for some much-needed support, but his failing strength completely abandoned him. He collapsed heavily onto the hard, dusty earth. His broken broom clattered away from his weak grasp. People simply walked right around his fallen body. Some muttered angry curses about the awful nuisance of beggars blocking the road. Without a second thought, Adaeze quickly abandoned her roasting fire. She completely ignored the sharp burning pain in her side. She rushed over to the fallen dirty man. She dropped down to her knees in the thick, dry dust. Her soft hands gently lifted his heavy head. His breathing was very shallow and weak. His dry lips were cracked and bleeding from severe dehydration. She quickly reached for the only plastic bottle of drinking water she had. She had carefully saved it for herself for the entire long day. She carefully poured a few cool drops onto his bleeding lips. She wiped the thick dirt from his face with the edge of her ash-stained dress. The old man slowly opened his tired eyes. They were surprisingly sharp and clear. They were a piercing, deep brown color. They seemed to hold a vast, silent ocean of deep thoughts. He looked up at the young woman kneeling in the dirt beside him. Her face was heavily smeared with black charcoal. Her warm eyes were wide with genuine, loving concern. Seeing that he was slowly regaining consciousness, Adaeze reached into her small basket. This was where she kept her own very meager daily food ration. It was just a single piece of roasted plantain. It was slightly burnt on one side. This was meant to be her only meal until the very next morning. She carefully broke it in half. She gently pressed the food into his trembling, dirty hands. The old man looked at the warm food. Then, he looked up at Adaeze's tired face. He observed the deep exhaustion in her slumped posture. He saw the visible wince of sharp pain when she shifted her weight. He noticed the stark, brutal poverty of her living surroundings. Something about the way she looked at him pierced him deeply. She did not look with pity, but with profound human recognition. He looked at her very carefully. He asked the burning question that had been forming in his mind since he collapsed. "Why do you help a filthy, useless beggar?" he asked. His voice was very raspy and dry. It was barely a whisper over the loud noise of the market. "You have absolutely nothing for yourself. I can easily see that you are starving. Why do you give your precious food to a stranger that everyone else despises?" Adaeze offered him a very soft, tired smile. The words left her cracked lips so softly, yet they carried the heavy weight of 1,000 powerful sermons. "Because you are breathing, Papa," she said very gently. "My dear mother taught me that a hungry stomach knows absolutely no class. We are all walking upon the exact same hard earth. Please, eat this. The hot fire will give me enough warmth tonight, even if my stomach is completely empty." The old man did not say another word to her. He slowly ate the warm piece of plantain. His sharp, observing eyes never left her kind face. The beautiful words hit him with a profound, emotional force. They echoed loudly and clearly in his wise mind. He was actively searching for any sign of hesitation in her eyes. He looked for any quick flicker of regret for parting with her only meal. But he found absolutely none. He found only absolute, pure, uncorrupted selflessness. It was simple, but it was incredibly real. Later that evening, the busy market had finally begun to quiet down. The dark shadows stretched long and dark across the empty wooden stalls. The crippled street sweeper slowly pushed himself to rise to his feet. He quietly picked up his worn, broken broom. He gave Adaeze a very long, lingering, and thoughtful look. Then he limped away slowly into the dark night. Little did she know, this small act of pure kindness was monumental. It had firmly set the massive wheels of destiny in motion. She truly believed she was only feeding a discarded, broken old man. She was completely unaware of a shocking, hidden truth. The filthy street sweeper with the dragging leg was not a beggar at all. He was none other than Chukwuemeka. He was the legendary billionaire and the reclusive chairman of Eagle Crest Industries. He was a very powerful man who controlled massive global supply chains. He regularly dined with presidents and kings. He was a man who had intentionally disguised himself. He walked the dangerous slums of Lagos to find answers. He wanted to find out if genuine goodness still existed in a cruel world obsessed with wealth. Neither of them knew that this was only the grand beginning. As the long weeks went by, the disguised billionaire became a permanent fixture. He was always there during Adaeze's brutal daily grind. He would slowly sweep the dirty areas near her stall. He silently watched her faithfully endure the searing heat. He watched her suffer the physical pain of her secret sacrifice. He saw her endure the harshness of extreme poverty. And every single day, without fail, Adaeze would save a portion of her water. She always kept a piece of her food for the crippled stranger. She treated him with the pure dignity and respect that the rest of the world had cruelly denied him. She had absolutely no idea that the universe was preparing a grand stage. The great storm of justice was gathering just over the near horizon. Months passed, and the season drastically changed. The dusty, dry Harmattan winds faded away. They were replaced by the heavy, suffocating humidity that preceded the rainy season. As the weeks went by, the harsh reality of street life took a severe toll. It badly affected Adaeze's already compromised, fragile health. The angry scar on her side was a silent testament to her ultimate sacrifice. It had become a constant, terrible source of agony. It radiated a sharp, burning pain every single time she bent over the roasting fire. Yet, she bravely continued her brutal routine at the Oshodi market. She was barely surviving on the absolute bare minimum, and she always shared her meager food with the crippled street sweeper. He had become her only silent companion in a cold world that had cruelly thrown her away. The first devastating blow of the gathering storm arrived on a chaotic Saturday morning. The huge market was overflowing with loud weekend shoppers. The incredible noise was a deafening roar of haggling, angry voices. Blaring Afrobeat music played from pirated CD vendors nearby. You could hear the aggressive honking of impatient commercial buses. Adaeze was kneeling low in the dirt. Her face was heavily covered in sweat and gray ash. She was desperately fanning the red-hot charcoals beneath her roasting plantains. She was so incredibly focused on the hot fire that she did not notice the danger. An entourage of heavily armed security guards was pushing through the busy crowd. Suddenly, a large, imposing shadow fell directly over her small stall. Adaeze quickly looked up. Her eyes were badly stinging from the thick, dark smoke. Standing right before her was Madame Patience. She was adorned in a flamboyant, heavily embroidered coral lace wrapper. She was dripping with thick, heavy gold chains that glinted menacingly in the harsh sunlight. The older woman had come to the local market for a specific reason. She was sourcing specific traditional spices for her son's upcoming high society engagement party. She looked down at poor Adaeze. Her eyes widened for a tiny fraction of a second in shock. Then, her face quickly contorted into a nasty mask of absolute, unadulterated disgust. A cruel, triumphant smile slowly spread across Madame Patience's heavily painted lips. She took in the sad sight of the young girl who had saved her son's life. She was now reduced to a dirty, ash-stained street vendor. Madame Patience confidently stepped closer to the stall. The heavy scent of her expensive, imported perfume clashed violently. It mixed with the cheap smell of smoke and rotting vegetables. "Look at what the mighty have sadly fallen to," Madame Patience sneered loudly. Her harsh voice carried clearly over the loud market din. She was intentionally drawing the curious attention of the surrounding traders. "I always told my rich son that you were nothing but a parasite. Just look at you. You are absolutely nothing but a heavy burden to the earth. You are a dirty, walking skeleton roasting yams in the gutter where you belong." The terrible words hit her like a hard slap across the face. Adaeze's thin hands trembled violently. The wooden fan slipped from her weak grasp and clattered to the dusty ground. She desperately wanted to speak. She wanted to scream the absolute truth about whose kidney was currently filtering the blood in her son's veins. But a heavy lump formed deep in her throat, choking back her desperate words. Madame Patience did not stop her cruel attack there. With a deliberate, vicious swing of her very expensive leather handbag, she struck. She hit the edge of Adaeze's hot roasting grill. The heavy metal pan quickly tipped over. It sent the burning charcoals and the carefully roasted plantains spilling everywhere. They fell directly into the muddy, foul-smelling gutter nearby. A whole day's worth of grueling, painful labor was instantly ruined. Her only means of survival was completely destroyed in a single, wicked second. Just then, the crippled street sweeper limped forward from the dark shadows. He held his worn, broken broom tightly in his hand. He bravely placed himself right between the weeping girl and the wealthy tyrant, his sharp brown eyes fixed intensely on Madame Patience. It was an intensity that made the older woman instinctively take a nervous step back. Madame Patience scoffed loudly. She covered her nose with a delicate lace handkerchief. "And now you keep dirty company with madmen and filthy beggars. Trash truly attracts trash. You really don't belong anywhere near civilized rich people. You never did." With a final, deeply dismissive wave of her hand, she turned around. She marched away arrogantly. Her large security detail aggressively shoved the innocent market crowds aside. Adaeze totally collapsed into the dirt right beside her ruined stall. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks. They cut clean paths through the thick layer of soot on her face. She fell into a deep, paralyzing internal silence. In the quiet, sad theater of her mind, she was no longer in the noisy market. She was right back in the sterile, freezing hospital operating room. She remembered the blinding bright surgical lights. She recalled the cold sting of the IV needle sliding into her vein. She remembered the terrifying, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. She remembered the intense, suffocating fear of dying on that cold table. It was a terrible fear she had swallowed entirely out of pure, selfless love for Dotun. She had freely given away a piece of her own flesh. She permanently disabled her own body, only to be treated worse than a dirty stray animal by the very people who feasted on her sacrifice. Why did the universe allow such terrible cruelty? Where was the divine justice her mother had so fervently promised? As she wept bitterly, she felt a gentle, calloused hand on her trembling shoulder. It was the crippled sweeper. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to the dirty ground. He began to patiently help her pick up the unburned pieces of charcoal from the dirt. Something about the way he carefully moved, despite his feigned limp, carried an undeniable, quiet authority. "The higher the monkey climbs, my sweet daughter, the more its behind is exposed," the old man whispered. His voice was remarkably steady and much deeper than usual. "Those who build their towering castles on the broken bones of the innocent will suffer. They will live to watch their castles crumble into dust. Do not weep for the wicked people. Their massive debt is actively accumulating." Adaeze looked at him, totally surprised. She was amazed by the profound wisdom echoing from beneath his matted beard. The words left his lips so softly, yet they echoed loudly in her mind. There was no taking it back now. She found a strange, inexplicable, and warm comfort in his presence. She was completely unaware of the truth. The kind man helping her pick up dirty charcoal was the billionaire CEO. He was the man who held her ex-fiancé's entire corporate future right in the palm of his hand. Weeks turned into long months, and the cruelty of fate only intensified. The second confrontation occurred during a terrible, torrential downpour on the chaotic streets of the mainland. Adaeze had been cruelly forced to take on an even more brutal job. She was carrying heavy basins of wet construction sand on her head. She did this just to afford the cheap painkillers she desperately needed. She needed them to keep her failing, sick body functioning. She was walking slowly along a severely flooded, pothole-riddled road. The crushing weight of the wet sand was pressing down hard on her neck. It sent agonizing, sharp spikes of pain shooting down her spine. The cold rain was absolutely relentless. It quickly soaked right through her thin, torn dress. Walking just a few paces behind her was the crippled sweeper. He was stubbornly insisting on keeping her company despite the harsh, freezing weather. Suddenly, a fast convoy of sleek, black luxury vehicles appeared. It was led by a massive, gleaming Rolls-Royce. It came tearing dangerously down the heavily flooded street. The driver was completely ignoring the poor pedestrians. As the fancy Rolls-Royce hit a massive crater filled with muddy, stagnant water, disaster struck. It sent a thick, filthy wave of brown sludge crashing violently. It splashed directly over Adaeze and the frail old man. The sheer, brutal force of the dirty water knocked Adaeze off balance. The heavy basin easily slipped from her tired head. It crashed loudly into the mud, spilling its heavy contents everywhere. She fell very hard onto the jagged, rough asphalt. Her knees scraped raw and started bleeding. Her surgical scar screamed in furious protest. The fast convoy abruptly ground to a halt. There was a sudden, massive traffic gridlock up ahead. The dark, tinted window of the Rolls-Royce slowly glided down. Sitting comfortably in the plush, air-conditioned leather interior was Dotun. He was dressed in a bespoke, very expensive Italian silk suit. He was casually holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. He looked out of the window. His eyes scanned the messy damage his driver had caused. Then, he locked eyes directly with the mud-covered girl struggling to rise from the gutter. A cruel, nasty, mocking laugh escaped his lips. The very man who once had no shoes to wear. The man whose life was currently being sustained by the kidney of the girl bleeding in the mud. He looked at her with absolute, pure disdain. "Just look at you," Dotun shouted loudly over the sound of the pouring rain. His voice was dripping with toxic, venomous arrogance. "I always knew you were born for the dirty mud. You are absolutely nothing but a miserable, useless wretch. I kindly offered you a much better life, and you threw it all away because you have no class. Keep rolling in the filthy dirt where you belong." He casually reached into his expensive designer wallet. He pulled out a single, crumpled 100 naira note. He tossed it carelessly out the car window. It landed directly in the filthy, brown puddle right near Adaeze's bleeding knees. "Go buy yourself some cheap soap," he sneered viciously. Then, the dark, tinted window rolled back up smoothly. The heavy luxury vehicle sped away quickly. They left her completely engulfed in a dark cloud of toxic exhaust fumes. The hateful words dropped like a heavy stone. Adaeze's heart began beating much faster. Her chest was heaving as she stared at the crumpled money in the mud. She was invisible, but in a good way, she had once thought. Now she just felt utterly and completely erased. She clearly remembered the sad days when Dotun was too poor to afford a basic bus fare to his job interviews. She remembered walking many miles under the burning sun to buy him his first pair of polished leather shoes. She had been starving herself for a whole week just to save the money. She had built him up from absolute scratch, and he had selfishly used his new power to crush her into the earth. The terrible injustice of it was a heavy physical weight. It was much heavier than the wet sand she had been carrying. The crippled sweeper slowly bent down low. His stiff joints popped loudly in the cold rain. He carefully picked up the dirty 100 naira note. He did not look at Adaeze. Instead, his sharp, piercing gaze was locked intensely onto the departing taillights of the Rolls-Royce. A dangerous, truly terrifying stillness seemed to naturally radiate from his hunched frame. A man who forgets his deep roots will dry up like a cut branch in the hot desert, the old man muttered. It was a dark promise of impending destruction laced securely into his quiet words. The storm is not just coming anymore. The storm is already among them. But fate had other, bigger plans. The ultimate, crushing test of endurance was yet to come. The climax of Adaeze's terrible suffering arrived exactly 2 weeks later. It was carefully orchestrated by a cruel twist of sheer desperation. Zenith Global Industries was proudly hosting the social event of the decade. It was the official, wildly extravagant engagement party of their CEO, Dotun, to the minister's daughter. The lavish event was held at the most exclusive, high-security luxury hotel in Victoria Island. The entire massive ballroom was beautifully transformed into a paradise. It was full of imported white roses, huge crystal chandeliers, and flowing, expensive French champagne. Adaeze needed to afford a desperately needed doctor's visit. Her remaining kidney was showing terrifying, dangerous signs of strain. So, Adaeze had desperately signed up with a cheap, exploitative day labor agency. She had absolutely no idea where she was being sent. She arrived at the busy service entrance of the Grand Hotel. She was quickly handed an oversized, scratchy gray cleaner's uniform. She was strictly ordered to constantly mop the shiny marble floors of the main ballroom's perimeter. The sheer, overwhelming opulence of the event was suffocating to her. Adaeze kept her head bowed down low. Her face was hidden safely behind the mop handle. She carefully navigated the edges of the room filled with billionaires, powerful politicians, and wealthy socialites. She felt very sick. Her fragile body was trembling with a high fever, but she bravely forced herself to keep scrubbing, completely desperate for the day's tiny wage. However, her quiet, brave attempt at survival was totally shattered. She was suddenly ordered to clean a spilled drink very near the VIP head table. As she dropped down to her hands and knees with a wet rag, she looked up and froze in terror. Sitting comfortably just a few feet away, practically glowing in a custom-tailored tuxedo, was Dotun. Beside him was his beautiful, highly polished new fiancée, and hovering proudly over them was the wicked Madame Patience. Before poor Adaeze could retreat, Madame Patience's eagle eyes spotted her. She recognized the scarred, familiar face hiding beneath the cheap cleaner's cap. A wicked, highly malicious light danced brightly in the older woman's eyes. She clearly saw an opportunity for the ultimate, crushing public destruction of the girl she deeply despised. Madame Patience intentionally reached out her hand. She forcefully knocked an entire large silver platter off the table. It was full of rich, oily stew in expensive crystal glasses. It crashed directly onto the pristine white marble floor. It landed mere inches from exactly where Adaeze was kneeling. "You!" Madame Patience barked loudly. Her harsh voice boomed over the soft, elegant classical music. It instantly drew the curious attention of hundreds of wealthy guests. "You totally incompetent, clumsy fool. Just look at the disgusting mess you've made." The beautiful music ground to a sudden, awkward halt. The entire grand ballroom fell into a deafening, suffocating silence. Hundreds of pairs of judgmental eyes turned to stare at the frail girl. She was in the ugly gray uniform, kneeling right in the spilled food. Dotun stood up quickly, adjusting his expensive silk tie. He looked down at Adaeze with a very cold, calculating cruelty. He recognized her immediately, but rather than feeling any shame, he felt a sick, twisted thrill of absolute power. "Who let this wretched, dirty creature into my elegant engagement party?" Dotun demanded loudly. He was aggressively playing to the elite crowd. "Security! Drag her out immediately! She is a common thief! She is a beggar from the slums trying to steal from her clear betters." Hot tears rolled down her cheeks as Adaeze desperately tried to scramble backward. Her bare hands were sliding in the oily, messy stew. The sharp broken glass was cutting deep into her soft palms. She was completely trapped. She was surrounded by a sea of hostile, wealthy faces, openly mocking her poverty. But the horrific humiliation was not yet complete. Suddenly, a loud commotion erupted near the grand glass entrance doors. Two burly, aggressive security guards burst directly into the ballroom. They were violently dragging a frail figure right between them. It was the crippled street sweeper. He had been loitering persistently outside the luxury hotel, flatly refusing to leave the perimeter. "Sir, we caught this filthy beggar trying to sneak near your expensive cars," one of the guards announced loudly. He threw the old man very roughly onto the marble floor. He landed right next to the weeping Adaeze. Dotun let out a booming, highly theatrical laugh. It echoed loudly off the sparkling crystal chandeliers. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the bleeding girl and the ragged old man lying side by side on the floor. "Look very closely. Everyone," Dotun declared loudly. His voice was ringing with absolute, blinding arrogance. "This is exactly what happens to useless parasites. This miserable cleaner used to obsess over me. And now she keeps company with crippled madmen. Let this be a strong lesson to anyone who thinks they can leech off the huge success of Zenith Global. You are absolutely nothing. You are less than the dirt on my very expensive shoes." The large crowd of elites erupted into cruel, polite laughter. They were loudly murmuring their intense disgust at the sight of the two filthy peasants. They were ruining the beautiful aesthetic of their billionaire gathering. Adaeze's vision began to blur darkly. The intense physical pain in her side was overwhelming. Combined with the crushing, unbearable weight of public humiliation, it was finally far too much. She curled tightly into a small ball on the cold marble. She was desperately wishing the earth would open up and swallow her whole. The great storm had finally broken, and it was tearing her to tiny shreds. But as Dotun smiled triumphantly, basking in the loud applause of his wealthy peers, he missed something. He completely failed to notice a terrifying, massive change occurring on the floor below him. The crippled street sweeper was no longer trembling. He placed his rough hands flat on the cold marble floor. He pushed himself up with great force. He did not struggle at all. He did not lean on his broken broom for support. He stood up to his full, imposing height. He was suddenly taller than any other man in the room. He rolled his broad shoulders back. The hunched, weak posture vanished in a single instant. He reached up with very steady, strong hands. He pulled off the messy, matted, filthy beard. He took a clean white cloth from his hidden pocket. He wiped the thick layer of dirt from his face. The physical transformation was absolute and stunning. The ragged clothes remained, but the man wearing them was truly a king. His eyes were sharp, icy cold, and utterly terrifying. He looked straight at Dotun. The entire crowded ballroom collectively held its breath in shock. Is this how the chief executive of Zenith Global treats the true architect of his life? The voice was not raspy anymore. It was not weak at all. It was a powerful roar of thunder that shook the delicate crystal glasses on the tables. It was a loud voice of absolute, unquestionable authority. It was a voice highly accustomed to commanding huge empires and breaking nations. Dotun totally froze in place. His arrogant, nasty smile vanished completely. His jaw dropped open in disbelief. The Minister of Petroleum, sitting at the VIP head table, suddenly stood up. His face was rapidly draining of all color. The minister frantically pushed past his own security guards. He bowed slightly and very respectfully toward the ragged man. "Chairman?" the minister stammered nervously. His voice was visibly shaking with pure terror. "We did not know you were here today." Dotun looked wildly at the minister, then back at the strange old man. His greedy mind could not process the crazy reality unfolding right before him. "Minister, what on earth are you doing? This is just a beggar. He is a local madman from the slums." "You arrogant blind fool," the old man boomed loudly. He was stepping forward with heavy, confident steps. "My name is Chukwuemeka. I am the chairman and founder of Eagle Crest Industries. I am the man who holds the total fate of your pathetic little company right in my hands." A collective, loud gasp echoed throughout the entire ballroom. Elegant women quickly covered their mouths in deep shock. Powerful men nervously took a step back. The hired orchestra players literally dropped their shiny instruments. Madame Patience let out a very high-pitched, pathetic squeal. Her weak legs gave way as she collapsed heavily into a chair. "For 6 long months," Chukwuemeka continued angrily. His strong voice was echoing loudly in the silent, stunned room. "I walked the dirty streets of Lagos. I completely disguised myself as the absolute lowest of the low. I wanted to clearly see the true heart of my new business partners. I did this before I signed the largest corporate merger in African history. I deeply wanted to find out if genuine goodness still existed in a world obsessed with wealth. And what did I find here?" Chukwuemeka pointed a very steady, accusatory finger right at Dotun. "I found you. You aggressively drove your luxury vehicle through the mud. You did it to intentionally splash a starving, sick girl. You threw a crumpled note at her bleeding knees like a coward. You clearly showed me that your soul is as black as the filthy gutters of Oshodi." Dotun began to hyperventilate loudly in panic. The expensive silk tie around his neck suddenly felt like a tight hangman's noose. "Sir, please. It is a huge misunderstanding. She is a dangerous thief. She was aggressively stalking me." "Silence!" Chukwuemeka roared furiously. The loud command snapped through the tense air exactly like a whip. "Do not dare to speak her pure name with your filthy mouth. You proudly stand there, totally arrogant, wearing expensive suits and drinking imported champagne. But the greatest, most tragic thing is your total, blinding ignorance. You are actively breathing on borrowed time." Chukwuemeka turned his angry gaze to the shocked crowd. "When this kind girl saved me from starving in the hot market, I took action. I had my top private investigators look deeply into her life. I wanted to know how an orphan could possess such rare, uncorrupted kindness. And do you know what I found?" He looked back at Dotun. His eyes were burning fiercely with absolute righteous fury. "I found your secret medical records, Dotun. The anonymous organ donor who saved you from fatal kidney failure was not a corpse. It was her." The heavy silence in the room was truly deafening. It was a thick, suffocating, and terrifying silence. "She bravely went under the sharp knife," Chukwuemeka declared. His voice was dropping to a dangerous, highly lethal whisper. "She sold her late parents' precious ancestral land to pay for your surgery. She freely gave you a vital piece of her own flesh. And in return, you and your wicked mother threw her into the cold streets to die. You did it all so you could easily marry into political power. Dotun stumbled backward in absolute horror. He looked down at Adaeze, who was still kneeling on the floor. Her eyes were very wide with deep shock. The heavy truth hit him with the brutal force of a speeding train. The healthy kidney actively filtering his blood belonged to her. The very organ keeping him alive belonged to the sweet girl he had just ordered to be dragged out like trash. The Minister of Petroleum quickly turned to his daughter. He grabbed her arm very roughly. "We are leaving. Right now. The wedding is completely cancelled. I will absolutely not have my family tied to a monster." The beautiful fiancée took one long look of absolute disgust at Dotun. She forcefully threw her extremely expensive engagement ring right onto the spilled stew on the floor. Then, she marched angrily out of the ballroom. As for Zenith Global, Chukwuemeka announced firmly. He was pulling a sleek mobile phone from his pocket. "The massive merger is completely dead. The contracts are permanently voided. Furthermore, my lawyers have uncovered massive financial fraud in your recent corporate acquisitions. I am immediately freezing all your assets. The police authorities are waiting right outside this hotel right now. They are ready to arrest your entire board of directors." It was completely over. In less than 5 short minutes, Dotun had lost absolutely everything. His wealth, his bride, his reputation, and his freedom were gone. The sheer, unimaginable weight of the terrible shock was too much. Combined with the sudden, catastrophic terror of returning to poverty, it triggered a violent physical reaction in his body. Dotun clutched his chest in deep agony. His vision blurred darkly. He tried to scream, but the words could not form on his lips. His legs gave way completely. He collapsed heavily onto the cold marble floor. His body was seizing violently. He was having a massive, fatal stroke right there in the ballroom. It was the ultimate, terrifying karma for a sad life built on betrayal. Madame Patience crawled frantically across the messy floor. She was loudly wailing and screaming in panic. She was tearing wildly at her expensive lace wrapper. She hovered helplessly over the paralyzed, shaking body of her son. The crowd simply watched in stunned silence as the universe boldly delivered its brutal, instant justice. Chukwuemeka did not spare them another single glance. He firmly turned his back on the wicked people and walked over to Adaeze. He slowly knelt down on the hard marble. He was completely heedless of the spilled food and broken glass. He reached out and gently took her bleeding, calloused hands in his own. "You have suffered enough, my sweet daughter," Chukwuemeka said very softly. His voice was full of deep warmth and profound respect. "Your wise mother was right. True wealth is measured in kindness, and yours is worth far more than all the gold in my vaults." He signaled directly to his loyal security team. "Bring my private medical helicopter, now." Chukwuemeka gently lifted Adaeze safely into his strong arms. He carried the frail, ash-stained girl proudly out of the ballroom. The elite crowd quickly parted for them like the Red Sea. She was no longer invisible. She was the most important person in the world. 6 happy months later, the dark storm had finally passed. The bright sun shone warmly over a beautiful private island off the coast of Lagos. Adaeze stood gracefully on a large balcony overlooking the turquoise ocean. She was wearing a stunning, custom-made silk gown. Her health had been completely restored by the absolute best doctors money could buy. Right beside her stood Chukwuemeka. He was not just her savior, but now he was her loving husband. They had married in a private, deeply beautiful ceremony. It was a perfect union of 2 pure souls who understood the true value of humanity. Adaeze was now the proud co-chair of a billion-dollar philanthropic foundation. She was joyfully using her endless resources to build new hospitals and safe shelters for orphans across the continent. Meanwhile, in a dilapidated, leaking cement room on the far outskirts of the city, Dotun sat in a rusted wheelchair. He was completely paralyzed on the entire right side of his body. He was entirely unable to speak. His face was sagging in a permanent, ugly mask of bitter regret. He spent his sad days staring at a blank, dirty wall. He was forced to listen to the bitter, angry complaints of Madame Patience. She now had to desperately beg for scraps in the local market just to feed them. Sometimes, the heavy punishment for losing a good woman is living long enough to clearly understand her true worth. This beautiful story teaches us that true kindness is never wasted. The universe has a powerful, undeniable way of rewarding those who give freely from the heart. It rewards you even when you have absolutely nothing left to give. Success may reveal the dark, hidden darkness in a wicked soul, but suffering beautifully polishes the bright diamond of a pure heart. If you enjoyed this powerful story, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more stories exactly like this one. Please share it widely with your friends and family to spread the deep wisdom and moral lessons of traditional African storytelling.